Hello, my name is Janet Peterson, and for years I carried the weight of a family that never once saw me as enough. I worked two jobs, raised my daughter alone, and sacrificed pieces of my future just to keep theirs intact. Yet in my father's eyes, I was still nothing but a disappointment. That Sunday night, when he finally declared in front of everyone that I was worthless, something inside me snapped, and I decided it was time to answer back. If this kind of story resonates with you, please share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. Every Sunday, I drag myself back to that house, praying that this time they might see me as more than just a failure. The air was heavy with late summer humidity when I parked my battered Honda Civic in the driveway, its faded paint dull beside the gleaming BMW, and the brand new Lexus lined up like trophies of success. I stared at them for a beat too long, feeling that familiar knot pull tight in my stomach. My hands still smelled faintly of disinfectant from my night shift, and I could already hear laughter spilling faintly through the Petersons' immaculate windows. For a moment, I thought about turning the key in the ignition and driving away. But obligation habit and some pathetic flicker of hope pushed me out of the car and toward the front steps. The door opened before I even touched the knob. My father stood there, Harold Peterson, crisp button-down shirt, ironed sharp as if he were still going to the office. His gray eyes scanned me with impatience. "You're late?" he muttered instead of a greeting. I forced a smile. Traffic. It wasn't traffic, and he knew it. But he didn't press, just pivoted on polished shoes and strode back inside. The smell of beef stew and fresh bread curled through the hallway, deceptively warm. It should have been comforting, but the tension lurking beneath it was as familiar as the ticking grandfather clock in the corner. Doris, my mother, fluttered about in her floral apron, her perfume mingling with the pot roast aroma. She kissed my cheek absently, then darted back to the kitchen. Her affection was always fleeting, like a habit rather than a choice. At the dining table, Kenneth scrolled through his phone in his suit, his wife Sandra spoon-feeding their toddler while sneaking satisfied glances at his cufflinks. Beverly swept in from the living room, still in her hospital scrubs, her hair shining in a perfect ponytail despite the 12-hour shift she'd probably brag about before dessert. Paul leaned comfortably beside her, effortlessly charming, listening more than speaking. I sat down at my usual spot, half invisible, half tolerated. The clink of cutlery filled the silence until my father cleared his throat with the formality of a toast. "So, Kenneth, tell us about the partnership." Kenneth straightened his voice, rich with triumph, as he launched into details about corner offices and cases. My mother gasped in delight, her hands pressed together like he'd announced a Nobel Prize. Beverly chimed in with polished questions, eyes sparkling. Pride radiated across the table like stage lights all pointed in one direction. And Beverly Harold pivoted. "What's happening at the hospital?" Her smile widened. "I've been appointed head of pediatrics. Youngest in the hospital's history." Cheers. Applause. Toasts raised. Even the baby clapped his hands on instinct. I waited for the moment they'd ask about me. When it came, Beverly tossed it casually like a bone thrown to a dog. "And you, Janet?" Anything new at the diner, I swallowed. My palms were slick under the table, but I forced my voice steady. I was named Employee of the Month. And Emma. She made honor roll again. The silence was thin polite. Kenneth's eyebrow lifted a smirk, tugging at the corner of his mouth. Employee of the Month. At a diner. My mother patted my hand. "That's nice, dear," she said, already standing to fetch the champagne for Beverly's promotion. The conversation shifted like a tide, sweeping my little announcement out to sea before it could even float. I pressed my nails into my thigh beneath the table, steadying my breathing. My eyes flicked toward the purse hanging on the chair beside me. Inside, tucked carefully within, was the blue folder. Its edges pressed against the fabric, a quiet reminder that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. A flash of movement caught my eye. My mother closing a drawer too quickly in the sideboard, her fingers fumbling over a small velvet box before shoving it out of sight. I filed the image away. The Petersons had secrets, and I was done pretending not to notice. Conversation swelled again. Kenneth talking about politics, Beverly describing European vacations, Sandra laughing softly at jokes meant to exclude me. I kept chewing bite after bite until my father's voice sliced through the din. Some people make the wrong choices, throw away opportunities. The fork trembled in my hand. He didn't look at me, but the jab hit home as clean as a blade. College is hard work, he continued. Not everyone can handle it. The table went stiff. Beverly's eyes dropped to her plate. Kenneth didn't even bother to hide his grin. Heat rose up my throat, but I forced it down with water. If only they knew. If only they understood what I carried with me tonight. I glanced at the purse again, at the blue folder resting quietly inside, waiting for its moment. My pulse steadied as I thought of Emma asleep at her friend's house, blissfully unaware of this ritual humiliation. Tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't alone. The grandfather clock chimed each strike, drilling into the silence that followed my father's latest insult. I kept my gaze on the table, but the fire inside me grew sharper, stronger. The box my mother had hidden the folder pressed against my thigh. They were threads in a tapestry none of them could see yet. I lifted my glass, my lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. The stew tasted like ash, but the anticipation on my tongue was sweeter than anything I'd swallowed in years. If only they knew what I was about to show them. If only they realized that the balance of power at this table was shifting right here, right now. If only they knew what I kept inside that folder. But tonight they would. And then the word dropped sharp as glass. You're worthless in this family. The clatter of forks and knives froze midair. My father's voice hung above the table like smoke after a firework, acrid, impossible to ignore. For a moment, no one moved. The roast cooled in its pan. The gravy hardened, and I sat there, my pulse thudding against my ribs like it was trying to break out. He didn't even bother to look directly at me when he said it. His gaze fixed on his plate, his knife slicing meat with practiced precision as if tearing me apart was just another nightly ritual. 32 years old, 2 dead-end jobs, a single mother with nothing to show. That was the picture he painted, and the others nodded silently even if they didn't speak. Doris stirred her wine glass without looking at me. Kenneth's lips curved smug as though my humiliation fed him. Beverly shifted in her chair, but her silence was consent. I couldn't breathe. His words burrowed under my skin, echoing years of smaller cuts that had never fully healed. 1,000 little reminders that I didn't measure up, that I was the Peterson who failed. But the truth they chose to forget was carved into my memory with the clarity of a scar. I was 19 when the phone call came from the hospital. Grandma Rose's medical bills had piled too high, the insurance didn't cover half of what she needed. My college fund, $18,000 I'd saved and earned, vanished into IV drips and monitors. I signed the forms myself, my hand steady despite the weight of it. Doris had hugged me that night, whispering, "You did the right thing," while Harold looked on in silence. Years later, the phone rang again, this time for Harold himself. His heart surgery would cost $4,000 more than the insurance covered. I was the one who stepped in, writing the check with shaking hands. I remember his pallor when he came home, Doris crying into his shoulder. No one remembered the girl in the hallway holding the receipt. Beverly needed books during her second year of med school. $600. She asked with an apologetic smile, promised she'd repay me when she got her first job. She never did. I had smiled anyway, trying to believe the lie. And Kenneth, my golden brother, the lawyer, his bar exam prep fees. $1,500. He texted me a thank you, promised to make it up to me when things settle. That message was still saved proof, etched in pixels. But years had passed and settling never came. Each memory cracked open, now raw and jagged, bleeding into the silence of the dining room. My hands trembled under the table as I traced the outline of the blue folder beside me. It was heavy, not just with papers, but with every sacrifice I had made that they pretended never happened. Harold's voice snapped me back. Some people waste their lives. Others carry the family name forward. You, Janet, you've chosen the wrong path. Emma will suffer for it. That did it. The room blurred as my vision sharpened into something icy, cutting through the fog of shame. My chair screeched as I pushed it back, standing before I even realized I had moved. My legs shook, but my spine was straighter than it had ever been in this house. If not for me, I said, my voice cracking, then steadying, you would have lost this house years ago. The room gasped. Doris's wine glass tipped, spilling red across the tablecloth like blood. Kenneth stared stunned for once while Beverly's fork clattered to her plate. My fingers closed tight around the folder. I pulled it up slowly, deliberately, like unsheathing a blade. The weight of it thudded against the table. I looked directly into Harold's eyes for the first time that night, and I saw the flicker, tiny but there, of unease. You call me worthless? My hand slid across the folder's clasp. My breath came fast, but the words left me like fire catching dry wood. Let's see how worthless I look on paper. The room went cold as I laid the first paper on the table. The sharp thud of the folder against the wood echoed louder than any insult hurled at me over the years. My father's knife froze mid-slice, his eyes narrowing as though he couldn't quite believe I had the audacity to break the Peterson ritual of silence. Doris's hands trembled her wine glass, tipping slightly before she steadied it. Kenneth leaned back, suddenly pale, while Beverly's fingers knotted around her napkin. Sandra and Paul exchanged a glance, unease flickering across their faces like the first spark of a storm. This, I said, my voice measured steady as your signature. I pressed the promissory note flat on the tablecloth, its ink dark and unyielding. Harold's name glared back at him in looping strokes with Doris's smaller witness signature just beneath it. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the numbers were clear as day. $4,000 for his heart surgery. He opened his mouth, but no words came. You remember this night, don't you? I continued. You remember me at 19 emptying the only savings I had so Grandma Rose could have her treatments. You remember $4,000 more when it was your heart on the line. Or did you forget the hand that pulled you through? Doris closed her eyes. Tears caught on her lashes. She didn't speak. She couldn't. I pulled out the next sheet, sliding it forward with deliberate care. My phone buzzed as I tapped, projecting an email onto the screen so no one could claim forgery. Kenneth's words filled the room. Thanks again, sis. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Attached was the receipt, $1,500, bar exam prep course paid in full by me. Kenneth's jaw tightened, beads of sweat glistening at his temples. That was years ago and still unpaid. I cut him off, my tone slicing through his excuses. You promised. I saved that email, Kenneth. I kept it all. Beverly's turn came next. I held up the Venmo receipt, the caption reading Med Textbooks. $600. I placed it in front of her like evidence presented to a jury. Her eyes flooded her mouth, opening and closing without sound. She shook her head, but no denial came. You, I said to her softly, promised to. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, each strike hammering down judgment. Sandra shifted in her seat, her fork scraping nervously against her plate. Paul leaned back, arms crossed, his gaze darting between Harold and me, as though realizing for the first time the rot beneath the Peterson family pride. I straightened my shoulders, letting the power of the moment swell in my chest. For 13 years, I carried all of you. While you climbed ladders, wore your white coats, stood in courtrooms, I paid the bills you pretended didn't exist. Do you want the total? No one answered. I slapped the final sheet onto the growing pile, the papers fanning out like a spread of accusations. Over $30,000, more than a decade of sacrifice. And you... I fixed my father with a stare that burned hotter than any shame I had ever felt. You call me worthless. The words ricocheted through the dining room, hollowing out the pride that had once filled it. Doris's sob broke the silence. Beverly's tears slid unchecked down her cheeks. Kenneth wiped his forehead with a shaking hand. Even Harold, the man who had never flinched, leaned back as though the weight of those receipts was pressing him down. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. My movements precise, deliberate, every page a nail in the coffin of their lies. My voice dropped lower, quieter, the tone that carried when truth needed no volume. And there's one more thing. Something Mom has been hiding all these years. My hand shook only once when I placed Grandma Rose's ring on the table. The small circle of gold caught the dim light, its stone gleaming like an accusation. The air seemed to collapse inward, dragging every pair of eyes toward it. The roast lay forgotten steam long since vanished, while the grandfather clock's ticking grew louder, heavier like a gavel demanding silence. I could feel Doris stiffen. Her hand darted to her mouth, a muffled sob slipping out as though she already knew there was no escape. Harold's face darkened, red blotches spreading across his neck. Kenneth shifted in his chair, guilt plastered across his sweating brow while Beverly hunched inward, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sandra and Paul sat rigid, hands folded tightly in their laps, unwilling witnesses to the unraveling of a dynasty built on silence. This was meant for me. I said each word cold precise. My eyes burned into my mother's. Grandma chose me. You hid it. Doris's hands trembled as she pressed them flat to the table. Her voice cracked, breaking the fragile stillness. I was afraid of your father? She whispered words spilling out like a confession in church. He said you didn't deserve it. He said it would cause trouble. Harold slammed his fist down, rattling cutlery and glasses. You don't bring that up in my house. His voice was thunder shaking the walls, but it no longer shook me. This isn't your house anymore, I replied, lifting my chin. It's a courtroom now and you're standing trial. His lips twisted, spittle catching at the corners. You are no daughter of mine. I stared at him, steady as stone. Then I am free. I said the words, tasting like steel. Free of your control, your insults, your version of family. From now on, every request goes through a lawyer. I pulled out the final card, the demand letter. The crisp paper landed atop the pile of receipts and notes, its black print stark under the chandelier's glow. My voice didn't waver as I read 14 days to respond. Otherwise, counsel will proceed with collection. The silence that followed was absolute. Doris's sobs filled it faintly, a thin thread of brokenness against Harold's smoldering fury. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off, my voice ringing louder than his rage ever had. If it weren't for me, I said each word like a hammer blow, you would have lost this house years ago. Without me, you'd be nothing. Worthless, no. That's you. The words struck like a verdict delivered. Harold's face twisted, his authority stripped bare under the weight of proof. Doris wept openly, clutching her apron. Kenneth and Beverly shrank back, unable to meet my eyes. Sandra and Paul looked on wide-eyed as though they'd stumbled into a trial they never agreed to attend. I gathered my coat in one swift motion, the air vibrating with the aftershock of what I had done. I didn't bother to look back. The door slammed behind me, reverberating through the house. On the table, the blue folder and Grandma Rose's ring lay gleaming under the dim light, abandoned but unmistakable. They sat there like evidence left at the scene of a crime, undeniable proof that justice had finally entered the Peterson home. For the first time in years, I woke up lighter, as if I'd finally set down a burden too heavy to name. The sunlight filtered through sheer curtains in my new two-bedroom apartment, spilling warmth across the walls, painted pale yellow by my own hands. No grandfather clock loomed here, no reminders of time as a weapon. Instead, a small clock I'd bought sat quietly on the shelf, its steady tick, not a judgment, but a rhythm I could claim as my own. I stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee, watching Emma curl herself into the couch with a book, her hair messy, her smile easy. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing playfully. You look different, Mom, she said. Different, how I asked. Like you're not pretending anymore. Her words sank into me heavier than any insult Harold had ever thrown. They were a mirror I'd been too afraid to look into, and now they reflected a woman finally standing without a crutch. At Murphy's Diner, the familiar clang of plates and chatter filled the air, but the day itself felt anything but routine. Sarah, my boss, called me into the back office, her expression unreadable. My pulse quickened until she smiled, handing me a paper. Assistant manager, she announced. You've earned it. Benefits, pay raise, and more hours you can actually plan around. My knees nearly buckled with relief. For once, my hard work wasn't invisible. I thought of the savings account I'd opened the week before, Emma's name on it alongside mine, a seed for a future we could both grow into. Later that week, I sat across from Dr. Patricia in her quiet office, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. Her voice was steady calm, the way still water settles after a storm. Boundaries aren't walls, Janet, she told me. They're doors. You decide when to open them and who to let in. It's not about shutting out the world, it's about choosing your own peace. The words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time, the idea of saying no felt less like rebellion and more like survival. One evening, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't expected. Nathan. My thumb hovered above the screen before I finally opened the message. I'm sorry. Can we talk? A follow-up notification chimed a bank transfer of $500. My chest tightened as I scrolled further. For the bar exam loan. I want to start making it right. Also, if Emma needs help with her school project, I'd love to pitch in. When we met at a cafe, his face looked older, wearier than I remembered. He didn't hide behind arrogance this time. Mom was right. He admitted, voice thick. I've been Dad's echo for too long. Let me fix this. The confession cracked something open in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Back at home, Emma climbed onto my lap as I read the transfer confirmation again. She traced the outline of my hand with her small fingers, her voice soft, but steady. Mom, are we going back to Grandpa's house now? I froze the weight of history pressing against the fragile peace I'd built. My hand closed around hers, firm, certain. Not yet, sweetheart. Maybe never. This year, the turkey roasted in my oven, and the table was finally mine. The scent of herbs and butter filled the little apartment, clinging to its yellow-painted walls like warmth itself. A vase of chrysanthemums sat at the center of the table, their gold petals catching the afternoon light. The laughter of children drifted in from the living room where Emma and Rose's grandkids sprawled across the rug crayons and paper scattered like confetti. For once, Thanksgiving didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like a choice. I set the carving knife down beside the turkey, pausing to glance at the small desk in the corner. The blue folder rested neatly in the top drawer, hidden away, not as a weapon, but as history. Its weight no longer pressed on me. It was proof, but it wasn't my burden. Rosa bustled in, carrying a dish of sweet potatoes humming softly. You've made this place a home, Carita, she said, placing the dish down with a proud smile. Her presence filled the room with a gentleness I hadn't realized I was starved for. Nathan followed, balancing a bowl of cranberry sauce, his shoulders less rigid than I remembered. There was humility in his eyes now, not arrogance. Emma dashed in from the living room, cheeks flushed. Mom, it smells amazing. She hugged me tight arms, squeezing harder than her little frame should allow. I smoothed her hair, whispering, This is our holiday, sweetheart. The phone rang. The sound cut through the warmth, slicing into the room like a cold draft. I knew before I picked it up who it would be. Janet Harold's voice came through unsteady, thinner than I'd ever heard it. Come home for the holiday. Let's sit together again. We miss you. My grip tightened on the phone. I looked around at the table set for people who had chosen to be here, at Emma's eager face, at Rosa's steady smile, at Nathan quietly arranging plates. Home wasn't a place. It was this. We already are home, I answered, my voice even. There was a pause, then Harold's tone sharpened, frustration leaking through. I said, I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. I replied, steady as a blade. Respect is, and I ended the call. The silence afterward was thick, but it wasn't heavy. It was freedom. I placed the phone down, turned back to the table, and picked up the carving knife. Emma climbed into her chair, her eyes bright with something deeper than simple joy. Mom, this is the best Thanksgiving ever. I kissed her forehead, my heart steady and certain, and there will be many more. Her story closed not with bitterness, but with a table reclaimed and a life rebuilt, proving that betrayal could no longer dictate her worth. Justice had not arrived swiftly, but when it came, it cut through every lie with the weight of undeniable truth. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Sometimes one act of defiance is enough to shatter generations of silence. Like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on this story type 1 if you felt the same.